Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. If you're listening to this blurb as opposed to having watched me talk for another 10 minutes, this means you're on YouTube, which means you might not know what day it is. It is Saturday. Normally, I used to stream on Saturdays at 6 in the evening. Then I switched to Tuesdays at 9 in the, sorry, Tuesdays at 7 in the evening. And now I am experimenting with doing a second stream in a week. If I do that for a full month, I even get to make affiliate. Will I want? I don't know. Now this is going to be a somewhat unfocused stream. It's about a bunch of different topics. I hope that in 3 days I will be able to talk about something much more massive about construction costs in the New York report. But for now, I'm going to start with a personal update, which is I'm not deactivating Twitter, but this is like the entire update. I'm not deactivating it, but I'm slowly moving away from it. Maybe the streaming every 2 weeks is part of it. You can find me at other places. Probably the best to find me at this point is Mastodon, Fediverse. And it is now I will say that this is a more European space so far than an American one, and I don't just mean that Eugen lives in Berlin. I mean that the people that have migrated so far are more European than American, and it has a somewhat different focus, um, which you absolutely should be following. Um, but at any rate, um, this has gotten me thinking about a bunch of, let's call it a smattering of different European issues that I never got to devote a full stream to. So let's talk for a moment about accessibility. Now this is based on, no, I should say European because it's based on a conversation that I had with a British person with a British person who suffered from POTS and long COVID who lives in Berlin. But it also mirrors something that I've seen among a bunch of Americans that I know who are chronically ill. And I'm saying chronically ill, not disabled, because there are many different kinds of disability. Now, what is the symbol of disability? What is the symbol of accessibility, right? It's disabled symbol. It is the wheelchair. And so uh, the most visible disability is using a wheelchair. Now, literally, I Googled this, so you're already seeing things like redesigning the wheelchair symbol to include invisible disabilities. Now, there are many. As you can, I'm just you're saying things like cognitive disorders here, blindness, or difficulties with sight beyond what can be corrected with glasses, which I would show you, except I managed to not remember where I put my glasses in the last 10 minutes, and hearing difficulties, including full deafness. Literally, this is a wheelchair symbol. Okay, I can't. You guys may not be able to see it. It's a wheelchair symbol that that is decomposed into all the others. So ramps. This is for elderly people who walk with canes. And I bring this up because, as far as I can tell, a very large majority of people with disabilities are they have invisible disabilities. For example, chronic illness or chronic pain. This is something that is profoundly different from wheelchairs, and this is especially important for public transportation. Why is this important for public transportation? The reason is that by far the most capital intensive intervention concerning accessibility to disabled people has to do with accessibility to people who use wheelchairs. Why? Well, first of all, The vast majority of public transport by ridership is urban rail. Urban rail is typically elevated or underground. Um, you need stairs to get there. Maybe an escalator. Neither of these things is accessible to people who use wheelchairs. And as a result, um, and as a result of that, it requires quite a lot of money to spend on installing elevators at stations. Money that is often an investment is often a generational project for various cities. Now, in my city, Berlin, I believe three-quarters of the U-Bahn and not quite all, but nearly all of the S-Bahn uh, have step-free access. The British term for this is step-free access. Let's use that. It's probably the best. Usually elevators, although at most of the outlying S-Bahn stations, the accessibility is provided with ramps rather than with elevators, ramps being cheaper. Um, they're more land intensive, but if you're in a suburban part of Berlin, you have land. Berlin is not a land constrained city. The central parts of it are. The suburbs have lots of space. Um, Now, Berlin was supposed to be 100% accessible by now. They're still saying they're going to be 100% accessible in about 2 years. Um, my home station, Heinrich Heine Straße, is one of the few inaccessible ones, and I'm not seeing any elevator works there. Um, so, I mean, if it's not going to be in 2 years, it's going to be in 3 or 4. So it's not that massive of a delay, but it is a delay, and it's bad for people, meanwhile, who need this. Um, and the sort of standards about accessibility for wheelchair users are probably the most difficult to retrofit. And don't just mean elevators. I mean things like internal ramps within a station, passageway widths, things like that. Whereas, for example, for people who are um, deaf or hard of hearing, or for blind people, for both of these groups, you can actually do things like um, multisensory UI. So things like clearly audible announcements that are probably announced, they're pre-recorded rather than announced by the conductor or by the train driver, just because the train driver is going to have an accent, is going to talk fast, there's going to be background noise, a recorded announcement is going to be much clearer, um, good visual cues, tactile pavements, like all of that costs by the standards of elevator installations, zero. Now, all of these are visible disabilities, maybe not being deaf, but blindness is usually quite visible, and often blind people elect to be more visible so that people will get out of their way. I read that one of the reasons that blind people sometimes um, uh, use canes uh, is that it's not because they need them or because they're that helpful, but that because it signals to other pedestrians to get out of the way. Conversely, there are blind people who are trying to keep their disability invisible because of people who think they're being helpful and instead engage in stalkerish behavior. Uh, and so the um, but all of these are outnumbered by invisible disabilities. Um, by people who can just be browbeaten into being told that you need to walk a little bit. And yeah, they're I mean they're foot mobile. They can walk. I mean, for example, the person that I've spoken with, or a bunch of Americans that I know with various kinds of chronic illness. First of all of them can walk. Maybe they cannot walk very long distances, but they can walk. Um, Something very important. Among the ones that I've spoken with, none has said that it's bad that bus stops are spaced 400 meters apart in Europe and they should be 200 meters apart as in the United States. It's really important. Because I have heard of an elderly and bus planner suffering from chronic pain named Alan Rosen, a well-known New York curmudgeon, claim that it is inaccessible to widen the bus stop spacing. He's wrong. I mean, it's inaccessible for a few people, but then the accessibility benefits for other people are greater. So things like chronic pain, chronic illness, they're just it's much easier for people to ignore them, and then just browbeat people about why they're not working, 25/8. Um, and so it's just easier to pretend that it is not happening in the same way that, for example, it's very easy to pretend that certain psychological disorders, let's call them PTSD from having Putin invade your home, your home city, and bomb you. That is also something that a lot of people are very happy ignoring. Um, so I know quite a lot of these people. I don't mean war refugees. I know a handful, but not enough that I'm going to make proclamations. But I do know a lot of people with chronic pain and chronic illness, which I mostly ascribe to. It's not for all of them, but quite a lot of the ones I know through queer communities of various kinds, or through communities that, for example, through northeastern U.S. LARPing, which is a community that I think is majority queer. Um, and I keep talking about the queerness aspect of it because normally it is considered somehow low prestige or bad to talk about one's body. You're not supposed to do that. The body is to be talked about only in person, only at home. It's not a public subject of conversation. But in queer spaces, it is different because you can't, for example, not talk about this when you're certainly historically for, let's say, gay men. Um, Remember the AIDS crisis. So this might be public health. That might be a pandemic, which is maybe more traditionally high prestige subject of conversation, um but things about changes in one's own body tend not to be. Um, and because the queer community is exceptional about this, it's just something that queer people talk about more, and more openly, I think, than do straight people. And so I don't think that disabled people are likelier to be queer. I don't think queer people are likelier to be disabled. It's just something that they talk about more. So as it happens, the people I know who are chronically ill or have chronic pain, um, not all of them, but most of them are queer women. There's also a feminist aspect to how general society uh, downplays women's pain. Um, but at any rate, one of these things, and again, what comes out of the conversation that I mentioned with the British person in Berlin is that uh, they are really worried about corona. And again, it's something that I've heard from a number of different sources, and it's usually people, and it's usually people with some kind of chronic illness. They are really worried about corona. They're more vulnerable to it. Um, and this includes people with some kind of long COVID who are really worried about reinfection. Now, in 2020, there was this mentality that corona is awful and you could get long COVID, but you only get it once. You only get corona once. My understanding is that in 2020, when it was just the ancestral strain of corona, um, reinfections, I don't think they literally did not exist, but they were extremely rare. Um, and as the variants started taking over, the variants. I mean, why do the variants take over? First of all, they're just more infectious. But second, and more importantly, um, most of the world is vaccinated against corona, and this is late 2022. This is not the middle of 2021. It's not most of Europe and the United States. It's most of the world. Um, And so obviously there's evolutionary pressure for variants that are as different as possible from the ancestral strain, just because the vaccinations until very recently only targeted the ancestral strain. Now they're starting to do bivalents. So at this point, so back when they were labeled with Greek letters and it was Omicron, which was sufficiently different that it could reinfect very easily. It could also target vaccinated people. And yes, if you get Omicron, triple vaxxed, you're gonna feel it as a cold, as a pretty bad cold. But that, first of all, that's if you're triple vaxxed, and second, there's still a risk of long-term complications. It didn't happen to me, but this does happen. And again, this mostly affects people um, who's maybe people whose immune systems are already somewhat weak, or people who are already suffering from other conditions. And this is why people with and again, I'm centering chronic illness. The and the in this group tends to be the most worried about corona, to the point of saying that it is ableist for society to declare that it has moved on. That it is ableist for society to say things like we're living with COVID, and therefore masks are optional, and therefore you should not even tell people to put on their masks. And yeah, the fact that people don't wear masks on public transport is an accessibility issue, and it's something that needs to. So it's something that I think is in theory required in Berlin, but it is not meaningfully enforced. Where I have seen it meaningfully enforced, by the way, is intercity trains. So when I was traveling to Berlin from London, as the train crossed from Belgium to Germany, we were informed that masks are mandatory. Now, I had already worn a mask, but nearly everyone else on the train had not, and they put on the mask um, because it was mandatory, because it was announced that it was mandatory, and I guess the conductor started enforcing it. Um, and these are minimum FFP2. This is an FFP2. I think if you're in America, this is called KN95 for you. Um, N95s are higher standards that are also permitted, but this is the minimum. And I did have that. The next day, I think I didn't. No, I had it. I had one, but I lost it, and I had a flimsier medical mask as a replacement. And on the train, I was told it was not good enough. So someone, this is a medical mask. So someone, so they said that so they realized very quickly that I just did not know the rule, and would be very happy to get an FFP2 if it was available. They told me to buy it at the cafe car, but someone was willing to just give me a spare, which was really nice. So it is possible to enforce masks. Again, they do it in Germany on intercity trains. Now, it is easier to enforce on intercity trains because there are conductors than it is on urban rail. Urban rail does not have conductors. It does if you're New York City, and the subways have conductors, but the subway conductor in New York does not walk the train. The subway conductor in New York stays in a little cab and makes announcements. So the subway conductor is not actually a useful person for mask enforcement. Um, and the so this needs so this need to be taken, I think, a lot more seriously by inspectors. I wouldn't say by even by cops, but the problem is that um, in the United States, cops are an extremely anti-mask group, to the point that you could literally see higher levels of corona infections in, for example, New York, in the cop neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods where very few people take the subway. It's parts of Staten Island that have very strong. We're not like the rest of the city. IDPOL, and they had very high levels of corona infection just because they didn't believe corona was a thing. So it's a lot of corona denialism, lots of mask denialism. Um, in the spring of 2021, or the summer of 2021, the cops were the vaccination rates in New York among NYPD were uh, noticeably lower than that of the general population. I think it was NYPD, I want to say maybe FDNY and sanitation were the ones who were the big mask resistors, and then, for example, the teachers had much higher levels of vaccination. And private sector workers is the same thing. Um, so this is something where, like, having a social attitude that does not treat mask wearing as a bad thing, and so part of it is, so I want to say part of it is norms, because also with, at this point in Europe and in the United States, and I should say at this point, it was clear, like at the very, it was clear by the second half of March of 2020, that the Asian mentality of you wear a mask if you feel sick is superior. Remember, Taiwan went COVID zero the first time with these. Um, you just do this, and you do centralized quarantines, and if it's the ancestral strain of corona, you go zero COVID by May of 2020. And um, so things like that, like trying to just promulgate that as a social norm, I think is really important. Just because a lot of what other people with I want to say people. I don't want to say people with invisible disabilities, because people with invisible disabilities definitionally are not harassed over something that other people can't perceive. But people who look a little weird, for example, maybe they limp, tell me that they are being that they are being street harassed, right? So some of it is just figuring out how to transition social norms to ones in which this is this does actually get you in trouble. Into social norms in which if you're sick, you wear a mask. If there's a pandemic, and there's still a pandemic, um, let's see how many infections there were in Germany. I haven't checked this in a while, but so not that we're on a downswing, but um, we're in downswing, but note that it's still way more than either than the local minima. So the local minimum, I don't think has ever been beaten. The minimum of June, July 2020, between the first and the second wave, then the minimum of of mass vaccination before Delta, um, post Delta between Omicron, and this is where we are. So yeah, we're currently in a lull, but COVID is not even fully over. Like, this is deaths. Um, yeah, I don't think the opportunity was lost. I think the opportunity is harder now, but it is absolutely not. Look, I mean, look at us. Um, Deaths remain elevated. Like, literally, life expectancy. I mean, yeah, life expectancy is going to be higher than in 2020, but life expectancy is going to take a while to recover to 2019 levels. Um, just other things like this. Like, this is like, I'm not gonna like integrate this in my head. Let's just pretend the current level looks about average. It's like about 150 a day, they're saying. Yeah. If it's about 150 a day, Germany does not have perfect reporting, but has okay reporting. 150 a day is it's something like 50 something thousand access. And again, Germany doesn't fully report, but it's close enough, so it's not going to be much more than 60,000 access. Um, Crude death rate in Germany before Corona was 11 point something. Yeah, 11.3. Um, so this is it. So in a normal year, about 1 million people die in Germany. This year, the excess deaths are going to be about 6%. Now, 6% excess deaths. I mean, is it 2020? No. And this is what is the winter of 2020-21 when it got into the nursing homes? No. Is it 2020 in Spain or 2020 in the United States? Fuck no. It's still bad. Um. So again, it's social understanding that is actually so Borders. You're saying it's an opportunity that was lost. I don't think it is, because long COVID, as I mentioned, if you have long COVID from, let's say, ancestral strain, then you're extremely unlikely to be reinfected by the ancestral strain or alpha. But the ancestral strain and alpha have been extinct in the wild for I don't even know how long. I think the ancestral strain has been extinct in the wild for a year and a half, and alpha for somewhat more than a year. Um, Delta at this point is extinct in the wild, and so the and so if you have long COVID, it creates, as I understand it, complications that make it likelier and worse that you will get infected by a bad variant. I don't even know the BA titles. I think BA5 is the current one, or maybe it was the previous one. I don't remember. So this is like a really important accessibility norm, and the point is that Corona has created a large mass of disabled people with an invisible disability who have only been recently made disabled. And this is really important because disabled people have very low incomes because disability makes it very difficult for you to earn an income. However, in two ways, Corona has created a mass of disabled people with an income and social ties that they can use to add to self-advocate. And the first one is that a lot of people with pre-existing ties have been disabled by it. And the second is that work from home has skyrocketed. Now, there is a return to the office. I don't know what it is in the United States, but here there is absolutely a return to the office. In 2021, ridership on the U-Bahn was about a third below pre-corona norms. And just to put it in perspective, New York City is only now hitting about two-thirds of pre-corona norms. And Germany was averaging that in 2021, which included several months of lockdown at the beginning. So there is return to the office. Often it's a hybrid return, so sometimes Monday and Friday are still below norm. Something that you can again see in New York data very clearly. These are I think Monday is the weakest day relative to pre-corona norms, just because work from home, like 3 or 4 days in the office, usually the missing day is a Monday, and or a Friday, and so but even then, there are more remote jobs. My understanding is that again, this is American data because I have better American data on this, but I saw again on Twitter that that the employment rate for disabled people in the United States has sharply risen. Part of it is a strong economy, but it's not. But if it was a strong economy, it would have sharply risen gradually over 2019, for example, early 2020, when unemployment was already very low, and not. But what actually happened was the ability to work from home has made it easier for chronically ill people to work and also to form social ties. Just because, in addition to because the same tools that can be used for working from home can also be used for socializing from home. Maybe not literally the same tools. Let's call it the difference between Slack and Discord, or the difference between Zoom and Board Game Arena. But you can absolutely, for example, socialize over Zoom. I've done this. So the so both of these have, I think, created, or if they haven't created already, are creating a groundswell, I think, for much more social attention for invisible disabilities. And again, I'm focusing on chronic pain and chronic illness because I think that these are the most common. But it's really but it's really like a matter of social participation here. And one of these things, and one of these insights, is that um, living with COVID, like, you don't live with COVID, you die with COVID, if that makes sense. Um, I think that's all I have to say about accessibility in Corona, and I'm going to take questions. And if people don't have questions, I'm just going to move on to other things. But this is something that I think is really important. I mean, pandemics are a bad thing. Germany taking a what looks like a permanent 6% increase to its annual death rate, and that is considered like the almost like the least bad situation in Europe or something like that, or almost the least bad situation in Europe. That is fucking terrible. And and again, and the public transit system needs to reinforce that by mandating masks. Like, I mean, I don't remember, or maybe, or maybe I've turned them out, but I mean, they don't tell you that masks are mandatory on the U-Bahn, and I think that they should. As an example. Uh, okay, you've talked about okay. I've talked about the problems of electric buses and acceleration for chronic pain. How can railways reduce pain for these people? Um, the most important way that a railway can reduce pain for people with chronic pain is to exist. Um, the consistency with which people tell me that trains are less painful than buses is remarkable. I will also say that some electric buses are better than diesel buses for acceleration pain because they accelerate very quickly. But my understanding is maybe they accelerate more smoothly or something like that. They don't have rattles. A lot of the so um, in physics class, you learn to model particles. You learn to model motion as you have displacement. I mean, you have velocity, you have acceleration, maybe you have jerk, but and I'm pointing out fingers that are one more than the derivative. So let's do it again. Displacement, velocity, acceleration, jerk. I don't remember what the fourth derivative is. I think it's called jolt. But it's not actually how it works. The So, for example, the stop penalty is pretty consistently a second more than the formulas will tell you, just because it takes a little bit of time for the engine to, for even an electric motor to get to full acceleration at the beginning. Second, the um, the experience of, for example, braking, unless it's very carefully computer controlled, which, for example, it isn't on the New York City subway. Something that I keep noticing when I'm on the New York City subway is that you would expect that when you're decelerating, you're thrown forward, right? Because of inertia, and when the train stops decelerating, you move backward. But what actually happens is that the stop is so sudden in New York um, that people actually get thrown a little backward when the train stops moving, which is a jerk issue. Like the muscles, I mean, the deceleration is at most 0.1 G. The muscles adapt very quickly, but in the split second in which it goes from decelerating at zero point 0.1 at about a meter per second square to no motion at all, the muscles need to adjust, and then you're thrown. And then because the muscles are still trying to countermand deceleration, and there's no deceleration, you're thrown a little backward. Um, so part of it is just better computer control. Um, Part of it is then you have really fun issues like resonances and rattle. Diesel engines rattle a lot. Um, my understanding is that they rattle so much that DMUs are noticeably less comfortable to ride than locomotive hauled trains or EMUs. Um, Now, if you have an EMU, nobody cares about the motor noise pretty much. I think in one sense, I think so. I want to say, so I know that there's a European train. I want to say the Pendolino that specifically made sure that it is an EMU that specifically made sure that the motors um, are not going to be in the first class car. That the first class car is going to be a trailer rather than a motor car, because the motors might induce a little bit of rattle, but it's really unusual and normally nobody cares. The Shinkansen has always been an EMU, and the Shinkansen, uh, when it has trailer cars, they don't make any effort to make them the green cars because it doesn't actually cause any discomfort. So at this point, the Shinkansen and Borners, you of course know this, but the other viewers don't. The current norm is that the two end cars are unmotorized, which is something about braking characteristics. I don't remember, but what JR Central's explanation is. But right now it's 14 motors and two trailers. The trailers are the end cars, and neither of these is a green car. And likewise, the German uh, EMU, high-speed EMUs, they don't make any effort at this because it's not important. But for DMUs, it is important to the point that they actually uh, decided to discontinue them on a long haul line. In Norway, I'm just going to show you this line just to show you how peripheral this line is and how much of a hit on operating costs they had to take. So Norway has a little city called Bodø. Uh, Now, technically, it's a Norwegian city, so it must be small. The entire population of the country of Norway, of the Kingdom of Norway, is more than that of the city of Berlin, but not by that much. So, from my perspective, even Oslo is small, let alone. Okay, this should. Okay, so it's not. So you wish it were. You wish it were Trondheim. Trondheim is by Norwegian standards so big. I think the metro area is 500,000 people. They even electrify the commuter trains. Um, Here's Bodø. It is the northern end of Norwegian railways. Um, Look in the bottom right to see how far north it is. Um, the train there is unelectrified, and and because this is the city, it was to reduce costs. They made it DMU, I think, through cars because that was all there was demand for. But the rattle was so bad that they had to go back to a locomotive. And it's for, again, a very short train. Locomotives are amortized over a long train, so they had to take a big operating cost hit not to DMU this. I think this is where they're trying to do battery trains, because while Norway will electrify the commuter trains in Trondheim, um, they're not going to electrify a line. They're not going to wire a line to Bodø. Like, I won't say they have their limit. They probably should be wiring this as well, to be honest. But I get that nothing like this exists in India, China, or South Korea, the countries that are going for completionists right now. So yeah, the train needs to exist. This is far more important than anything. Like trains, it again needs to be electrified ideally, uh, but actually battery cars might be good enough to avoid the DMU rattle problem. Uh, the You need good computerized acceleration and braking curves. It's things that are already happening. More modern trains are better for disabled people. And I've spoken with someone who complained to me about, for example, the buses, not railways, the buses in Denver, but specifically said that that when they were in Sydney, the buses were fine. Which they specifically said was not a problem of potholes because they said that driving over the same potholed roads in Denver that would give them back pain from riding a bus, driving over these roads was okay. So mostly the train needs to exist in order to avoid chronic pain. There's a big gap between trains and buses. Trolley buses, again, some people find them really bad. Some people don't because they don't have the diesel engine rattle. So the diesel, so not the diesel, the trolley bus will cause you pain in ways that you can measure in acceleration and jerk. The diesel bus will cause you pain in ways that are unmeasurable in acceleration and jerk because it's resonances with the diesel motor. Um, Thank you for the question, Boris. It's really helpful, and I emphasize this again. Maybe it's not as it doesn't need to be as emphasized for a European stream, but in the United States, one of the copes of American transit planners and advocates has been, okay, we can't do trains, let's make the bus nicer. Um, and that has led some to believe that the bus is actually a replacement for a train, which it very much is not. Um, and it doesn't matter how much you're going to quote Enrique Peñalosa at me. People in Bogota don't like him very much. Bogota is building a metro, an elevated one. Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. Are there other questions about this? Um, and if not, actually, because of Bogota, I kind of want to say something really strange about Bogota that I am just going to throw out there because it bothers me. So I'm not going to show you personal correspondence from other people, but I'm going to verbally tell you what the costs are and ask that you trust that I did check them in PPP American dollars, and I memorized the costs in PPP American dollars. And they were before Corona and before current inflation, so you should probably mentally add 10%. Um, Bogota is studying a metro system, and I saw a like 2 page or something like that analysis that just said what the options are, and I didn't stare at the alignment. Like I'm not going to be like I can zoom in on Bogota, but I'm not going to be able to um, tell you what the alignment is or like highlight destinations or anything like that. But I will point out something that is visible about Bogota, which is that Bogota has huge death roads. Um, if you're wondering how you can make BRT work, I don't even know if this road has BRT to be honest, but look at how wide, how many lanes there are. Yes, you can make, yes, it's a 4 lane BRT system because Bogota is a city that actually has space for 4 lane BRT. Uh, this is a 60-meter street. To put things in perspective, New York, which for us Euros has very wide avenues, has 30-meter avenues. Broadway is 40 something. Um, so very wide streets, and they looked at both an elevated option and an underground option, and they chose the elevated one to save money, which I think is in general the correct choice for a city with streets that, as mentioned, are massive. Moreover, because the L is going to be a replacement for the BRT, um, it might cause problems during construction that make this not viable, but certainly after this opens, you can even use the footprint of the BRT lanes for this. Um, because when you build an L, usually, unless you have very wide sidewalks already, like Richmond, British Columbia, um, you need to lose at least one traffic lane. Now, obviously, ideally, you should be losing car lanes, but these restrictions are so wide you can just lose anything, and it's fine. Um, so this is Richmond, British Columbia. Vancouver is here. This is Richmond. It has on number 3 road Canada Line. The Canada Line is an unusually thin structure, and these are also wide sidewalks. Um, and they're part and the buildings are all set back from the street anyway. So this is how it became more acceptable to run over the sidewalk and not over the median. Normally, if this were to run over the median, they would have to probably lose the left turn lane. And so in Bogota, the cost per kilometer of the elevated option was 250 million, which is very expensive for an L, and for a subway it was 300. And I do not know why. Um, Now, what I mean by I do not know why, there are two things that I do not know. The first thing is I do not know why Bogota should have the largest um, subway construction costs in the Spanish-speaking world. Um, Other Latin American countries, I shouldn't say Latin American because Brazil is expensive. Other Spanish American countries that use international consultants tend to be using Spanish speaking ones, and therefore they build for costs that are not that high by Spanish standards. Um, so I don't want to say, oh, it's just neoliberals using international consultants to avoid any domestic expertise. It's not American firms because nobody in the United States knows that Bogota is even building a metro system. And in fact, so probably the most Americanized in the sense of cultural cringe toward American firms, Latin American country, that probably is Mexico. But number two has to be the Dominican Republic, which literally built a subway because the Dominican political elite, fundraises in New York City among the immigrants so much that they got used to the New York City subway and they said, why shouldn't we have this as well? So this city, um, like in a country that I think something like 20% or something, way more than 20%. Let me check that. So the Dominican Republic has about 10 million people, I believe. Am I right? Yes. How many Dominicans live in the United States? I want to say about 4 or 5 million, maybe. No, 2 million. So, yeah, 20% of Dominicans, and this is increasing through further migration. 20%, 20% of Dominicans, give or take, live in the United States, mostly in and around New York. Yeah, this country uh, built its metro for Spanish costs. Um, Now, the document that I do not mind sharing on stream is merged costs. It's in a new update, which is 1.4, no longer 1.3. And when it loads, and I also don't even mind you seeing who last added content to it, because the fact that Eric might add a new line to the database. Again, this is not exactly the world's that's not exactly the world's most guarded secret. So anyway, this is Santo Domingo. Uh, yes, this and this. One of no, this is. I actually show you it in inflation adjusted dollars. 143 and a half, 172 and a half, and this is, and the 172 is entirely underground. Now, is it the lowest cost in the world? Absolutely not. Is it good? Yes, it is. So Bogota, which is not on my list because they're still mulling what to build, um, was this would be 300, but an elevator would be 250, which is an normally low ratio. I do not know why. I imagine it's because the very wide streets make it easier to build an L, but they also make it easier, but they also make it even easier to build a subway. So it's possible that the subway option that they were looking at was cut and cover, but that would be like the world's second most expensive cut and cover subway ever after the Taipei MRT, and the Taipei MRT has capital P problems. So I don't know why it's so expensive, but I also don't know why the underground premium is so unusually small. The so in our database, if you want to try to look at the underground premium, it looks like a factor of 1.6, but remember more expensive countries such as India build Ls more, um, and cheaper countries just build subways because they can. And so that countermands. In practice, it's usually a ratio of about 2, maybe 2.5 of premium for a subway over elevated. So that it should be 1.2 is just puzzling me, and I do not know why. Um, I don't think I have Latin American viewers, unfortunately, but if people can tell me in comments or on Discord or email me or DM me. I'm still checking Twitter DMs, or DM me on Mastodon. Uh, then please let me know. I'm really puzzled as to why this should happen. And um, so so um, speaking of construction costs, I wanted to, before going. Actually, I'm going to go to Europe in a bit, and then I'm going to give the New York update. So for construction costs, the big update, it's not big update. We have 1.4, but 1.4 is just extra things in the database, like mostly more Chinese things. Um, and so the construction cost issue is that I did find, and here I'm gonna uh, just to make sure that nobody has sent me a very secret DM on Masto, which they still have. So okay. I'm definitely gonna follow the. Um, so I'm gonna look for something that I uh tweeted, not here, but I think the day before. So this is not a stream of Alon doom scrolls on Fetty for your eternal edification. Um, Here. So I did not have any itemized costs in Germany until this. Now I have itemized costs that are imperfect. So U5, the only subway extension that opened recently within the city of Berlin, a city that does not believe in building subways, which is unfortunate. I was reading some news articles that say that it's going to take 100 years for carbon amortization. So you see, one of the reasons, and you might know that the person who asked this question is the Green Party here is kind of useless on this issue. They're really nice if you want to convert car lanes into bike lanes, at least until a judge claims that it is unconstitutional to deny people the right to park. I think it was a parking lane, and a judge ruled it is unconstitutional because the German constitution guarantees freedom of mobility. Cars are mobility, and parked cars are somehow also mobility. Don't ask. The less you probe about the values of the German, of the native-born German middle class, the better. And but on stuff like building transit alternatives for people who have to travel more than about 5 kilometers to work, that is not something the Green Party is especially good at, and for nothing, nobody votes for them outside the ring. And the specific issue is carbon amortization. There's this god awful news article. Let me see if I can find. Baukosten in Berlin Tunnel. Uh, it's one of these. Uh, it's going to be called Carbon or Kohl. What is it? Beton, I think is. Yeah, this. Yeah. They're literally saying that the concrete costs are going to be a climate catastrophe just because they're using concrete to build tunnels. And wait, they're saying it's 600. No, it's the next one. And the uh yeah, so they're claiming that it's going to take 100 years to more than 100 years to amortize this uh through model shift. Dear Berlin Greens, you are terrible people. Nobody likes you. I only voted for you because I hate Franziska Giffey, the racist plagiarist, more than I hate this. Um, so let me explain. Um, they talk about how it's one of these things where it's much easier to count costs than benefits. Now, I tend to be very basic in counting benefits because I believe that too many benefit cost analyses are garbage. Um, Benefits are ridership. Benefits are proportional to ridership. I will tell you cost per rider, not as much as cost per kilometer because I don't have ridership per kilometer, unfortunately, for most lines. And this includes U5, where I have not seen ridership projections. I've not seen ridership projections for U5 or real ridership. They will not tell you how much ridership there is per station in Berlin. It's proprietary information. They will tell you ridership per section, but I haven't seen anything recent. I've only seen pre-Corona, pre-U5 opening numbers. Um, but I have seen ridership projections for the lines that they're currently calling a carbon catastrophe. And these are not expensive lines relative to ridership. Like the most important one that is now being built, U8 to Märkisches Viertel. U8 ends at Wittenau, which is here. Märkisches Viertel is here. It's a kilometer and a bit to get from here, which is, it's maybe not clear. Let me zoom in a little bit just to show you guys the density. The density in most of this part of Berlin, it's pretty suburban. It's single family, sometimes townhouses. So this is right. This is density that is on the dense side for single family by Western standards, obviously not by Japanese ones. Um, Maybe the lowest possible end for missing middle, I'm not sure. And then you have the actual high density project, which has a little bit that goes up until Wittenau, but most of it is very far from Wittenau. This is Märkisches Viertel. It is a high density, high rise housing project. Most of the density in this area is here, even with the extensive and excessive open spaces. I've been here. Um, just to say what it's like. It's not as nice in the sense of, let's say, placemaking or some kind of neighborhood center as its opposite numbers on the south, Globulstadt. But yeah, lots of people live here. The buildings are not bad. They should get a subway, and not just the people who live here. Very easy to extend. The cost per rider is projected at 15,000 euros, which they've decided not to build. Um, or sorry, to delay. And so the problem is ridership is very easy to build. So note that, for example, we talk about um, so it's very so you can exactly measure the ridership impact. Sorry, the cost impact of tunnel, but also the carbon impact of construction. Measuring the carbon impact of ridership is much harder, and the reason is that in the short run you do not see the model shift, and in the long run you can't measure it. I mean, in the long run you can measure it in the sense that you can tell that Berlin, which built a subway, has X motorization rate and X sub one motorization rate and X sub two car usage, and cities that didn't do this, let's call them Los Angeles, have Y sub one motorization rate and Y sub two car use, and both of these numbers and the Y's are much higher than the X's. Um, but it's something that's actually really hard to decompose into a specific infrastructure project because a lot of it depends on TOD. A lot of it depends on just the city rearranging itself organically around the new service without TOD, by which I mean things like if you take a so I'm gonna so Borners, you're gonna hate me for this, but I'm going to show you a New York example just because it's the most obvious one. There's practically no way to get by rail between New Jersey and Manhattan compared with how many ways there are to get by rail from Brooklyn and Queens to Manhattan. There are three rail tunnels between Jersey and Manhattan. Two of them are PATH. PATH is absolute garbage operations, and it only runs as far as Newark and Hoboken. This is PATH. I'm literally drawing you the Jersey map of PATH. In Manhattan, it has a little tentacle into Herald Square. The other way is commuter rail. Commuter rail has the usual problems of American commuter rail and also doesn't meaningfully serve the most urban part of Jersey, which is here. Um, and so I shouldn't say it doesn't meaningfully, it doesn't at all. The first stop is Secaucus, which is here. Um, so this means that the communities around here have developed around a situation of poor subway access. Um, and this is also true of their batch of dense urbanization in Jersey, which is Newark and Elizabeth. So they've developed around travel to Manhattan, travel to New York being only available as maybe a bus that you only take if you're a not fully assimilated Colombian or other Central or South American immigrant, or which is the buses here, or commuter rail if you're wealthy. They haven't evolved a culture where, yeah, it's completely normal for a person in Brooklyn or Queens to work in Manhattan. And this is despite the fact that the residential density in Hudson County, which includes wetlands, industrial zones, warehouses, single family suburbia, denser single family and middle suburbia, this county is almost as dense as Queens. It is the sixth densest county in the United States. The county is going by density: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, San Francisco, Hudson. Um, Newark itself is also rather dense, especially when you delete the parts of it that are airports. Um, and there's so much less commuting from here to Manhattan than there is from Queens or Brooklyn or the Bronx because there's less access. So what happens is if you improve access, thing that I most bat for, which sadly is unlikely to happen at this point of planning, is that the Gateway Tunnel. So this tunnel is two tracks. The Gateway project would convert this mostly two-track corridor into a four-track corridor. This part is trivially easy, but is being made difficult mostly because of this bridge called Portal Bridge. The tunnel is the hard part. This is called the Gateway Tunnel. Um, the thing that I keep pushing for that is unfortunately extremely unlikely to happen is that the tunnel, instead of just making the same stops, so Newark, Secaucus, Penn Station, it should have an additional stop, a mined cavern. I don't know what the cost of it's going to be. Probably low to mid single, like even in New York, it's going to be mid single digits. Sorry, mid triple digit million, and this is a $10 billion tunnel almost. To build a stop when it intersects the most important north-south bus corridor in this area, which is Bergen Line, which for some reason is not depicted in yellow on Google. Instead, they depict the old Main Street, Palisade, but for about 100 or so years, this has been the Main Street in Bergen Line. So um, they should have a stop at Bergen Line for easier transfers. Um, they should spend more effort on like trying to integrate the subway into New Jersey. Now, I mentioned this because yes, this could interact very well with the people already living here who would be using this because they work in Manhattan already. Many people do that commute. There's also a possibility of transit-oriented development. Um, New Jersey being possibly the yimbiest state in the northeastern United States. Hudson County specifically is possibly the yimbiest county in the northeastern United States. I want to say that they've had 7 or 8 uh, housing units permitted per 1,000 people per year. But because I have the memory of the boomer that I am, we are not going to rely on my memory, and instead we're going to check this. So this is again a place with lots of TOD. Thanks to the TOD, this place is substantially more affordable than either the city or the New York State side suburbs, which are some of the NIMBYest communities in the northeastern United States and in the world. Um, okay, so this accelerates. So as you can see, this maybe in early 2010s recession they didn't do this very much, but more recently, this is a county of about 600 or 700,000 people. So they build housing at like they used to build housing at a net rate, and pre-corona peak, the permits were like actually healthy, something that New York City would be kind of affordable if this per capita rate existed in the city. It doesn't. This is a county of, again, 600,000, 700,000 people. New York City is about 9 million. They approve about 20,000. No, 7,000 to. So the point is that, yeah, you can do TOD on this, which this being Hudson County, they would. Lots of of new development in Jersey City and Hoboken. But also, even if you didn't TOD, and this is the part, where I'm going to go back to the issue of Berlin. I just want to show you the Hudson as a barrier because it's much starker than the situation that we might see um, in a randomly selected city. Even if you don't TOD, this would be awful. TOD here is necessary. This is a very accessible part, even if it's just by bus. Now, if you improve access to be much better, a train station, um, even if you don't build any TOD, it will induce more ridership than exists now. And I don't mean in the sense that the train is better than the bus, and therefore people who are already working in Manhattan will switch from the bus to the train, or people who are driving to Manhattan will switch to the train where they wouldn't to the bus. No, I'm not making that assertion. I'm making a different assertion, and this is something that is very important for understanding the long-term evolution, not of subway costs, but of urban rail ridership, is that even if we're making the following assumptions, we're assuming a static Manhattan, no new offices. We're assuming a static Hudson County, no new housing beyond what is already being built, which again is already expensive. The presence of better subway links will induce more people here to seek work here. To some extent, also the other way around, but this is the job center, this is the bedroom community. Um, Essentially, what this means is that the presence of mass transit helps centralize the city. It helps people secure employment in city center, and this in turn, uh, no, this in turn, no, I said we're assuming static Manhattan, so we're not assuming more commercial development. But in practice, this increases the pressure for commercial development. Why wouldn't it? Because after all, it makes this more desirable as a job center. And this is even if you don't look at TOD, because usually you look at TOD where you build the infrastructure, which would be here and not far from it. And so this effect, um, to some extent, that effect is understood within Germany. The centralizing effect of better urban rail tunnels. Unfortunately, it is viewed as negative. It's viewed as something that creates inequality. And if you think it creates inequality, you do not want to know how much inequality there is in, for example, Texas with its highly decentralized metropolitan areas, or Florida. The highest inequality. I don't remember the numbers in the United States now, and I don't know how to get them for you. But I saw Gini indices by state and by metropolitan area of the United States maybe 10 or 12 years ago. New York was the worst city, metropolitan area and state. Number two worst was Miami. Among the city, like South with the South Florida metro region, and I think the state of Florida was number two. It's New York and it's New York, maybe some northeastern states and deep southern states. I think New Orleans is the third worst or something. Um, and I center Florida in this discussion in Miami just because um, South Florida is the epitome of decentralization. The residential density in Miami is not even that low. Lots and lots of high-rise condos, but everyone owns cars because there's essentially no city center to speak of. I think the closest thing to a city center has within 100 square kilometers something like 300,000 or 400,000 jobs in a region of 7 million people. Um, I don't know how many jobs are within the ring in Berlin. I guarantee you it's more than 300 or 400,000. I'm guessing, I'm going to make a random guess, which is that in Berlin it would be about a million jobs ish within the ring. Um, in northeastern US cities that are similar in metro size to Miami, and by northeastern I mean Boston and Washington, I believe or for that matter, not northeastern, but also old centralized transit city is San Francisco. I think same thing that in Miami is 300,000 or 400,000. In these cities, it's like 700 or 800,000. So much stronger central business district. And remember, these are less unequal than Miami. There's this idea that it contributes to inequality to have high-rise CBDs because rich people work there. Yeah, okay. Canary Wharf is the symbol of finance or something. Do you know what would happen if London had not built Canary Wharf? And if London had not built any high rises in the city of London, do you know what would happen to these finance people? If they would still be working in either the city of London in smaller offices, so the more peripheral employees within the same companies would be to subsidiary offices, as is common in the United States. The headquarters is maybe in a place like Chicago, and then all the subsidiary ones are going to be office parks in middle of nowhere, Serbia, out of sight and out of mind of top management. But and if Britain didn't build high rises in the city and in Canary Wharf, same thing would happen. It would not reduce inequality. It would just mean that it would mean that the rich people and less rich people would not be working near each other at all. And near each other, that's not supposed to be a solution to inequality. I don't want to call it feudalism because that's an exaggeration, but it does lead to but it does create expressions where like some really vulgar Marxism or the idiocy of rural life suddenly becomes where such vulgar Marxist expressions become kind of understandable. It's deurbanization does not reduce inequality, and it certainly does not contribute to more greenhouse gas emissions. Is the point? Because even in Munich, Munich is a much more auto-oriented city than Berlin. Um, Car usage is not that high because all these assholes who vote CSU and think that Scholz is probably a Putinist agent, but also oppose any kind of reduction in oil and gas usage. Um, these assholes around here, they work in the city. They work in city center. And the reason they work in city center is not because they think it's more moral to work in city center. No, they don't. They loathe the city. Like I've seen walking around here, and I think I posted this on Twitter. In the summer, there was this building here of some, I think, Price Waterhouse Cooper, that literally had the queer flag on it, like the queer flag that takes all of the different queer identities together. The one that has, what was it, queer. Let me see if I can find it for it. It's not the rainbow. It's the one that has the rainbow, but also a uh pride, but also like a trans section and an ace section or something like that. Um, like literally that. Like that is these are the values of Munich, a city that I don't think has in its post-war history ever voted for a right-wing government, and then the people in the suburbs probably would have preferred to be like Americans and drive to an office or to drive large SUVs to an office park. But city center is so much more accessible because city center has the S-Bahn and three different U-Bahn trunk lines all converging with really good connections between them. Um, and as a result, it's just more efficient. And yeah, the execs at BMW and the other firms, they also vote that, so they also hate the city. But but they're not Elon Musk. Um, Elon Musk hates other people, hates trans people more than he likes earning money. The average, the sort of exec to decide where to decide a firm, yeah, they probably hate trans people, but they like making money more than they hate trans people. So where do they put the building? They put it here. Um, and this is something that's very difficult to observe in the short run when you look at the long-term ridership impact of a subway line. You can absolutely measure in advance how many people will ride the line. That is, at this point, a largely solved problem. You can predict the ridership of an urban rail line 10, 20 years in the future, and it will match it. I believe what normally happens is that most lines exceed ridership, exceed the projections by a little bit, and then once in a while they flop. It's a little bit like it's a little bit like having a business, but having a business that is not like a VC fund. Like a VC fund, the idea is that 19, let's say you fund 10 firms, 9 fail, the 10th makes a lot of money to cover for the funds for all the time. But in normal business is the other way around. You get a loan from a bank to open a franchise to open a I don't know Venki franchise or something if you like ice cream. Then the bank will give you. I actually don't even know if Venki uses franchising model. Choose your own favorite chain. Um, the bank will give you a loan with the expectation that it is very likely that you will make a small profit, um, giving you, let's say, if it's a really successful store, let's say mid uh, six-figure annual income or low to mid figure annual income, which you will use to lord over your entire social circle and especially your employees. From time to time, it will flop. The bank will set the interest rate in a way that the interest on the large majority of businesses that are successful will cover the flop. Essentially, this is how urban rail ridership projections work in the United States nowadays, and I think also in Europe. In Canada, they work like in the United States, the same thing. They meet projections. Um, Again, usually exceed them. I have not yet seen the flop in Canada. In the United States, I can point them out to you. It's things like bar to SFO. Um, so we can absolutely measure ridership. This is important, but we cannot measure model shift very easily. There are long-term effects. I've had arguments about, for example, the €9 ticket, because the €9 ticket, we can absolutely measure the ridership impact, which was, as you can imagine, very positive. We can measure the model shift, which was in evidence, but very weak. Um, we can ask things like, in the short and long run, is it better to spend money on reducing fares or on improving service? The answer is always improve service. Um, but it's not actually that easy to figure out long-term impacts, long-term developmental impacts, especially of new subway lines. Essentially, in the case of, let's say, UA to Mákis what it means is that, so again, this is not as stark as the river barrier. I would absolutely walk a bit now to Mákis. Um, but it becomes much easier to find a job accessible by subway, for example, within Meta. Um, and this means that over time, people would, and this has a bunch of impacts. First of all, you can see it in uh, short and medium term impacts to where people work and where people want to site office buildings. Berlin does have demand for office buildings. Berlin does have DoD, despite the best efforts of the Greens and even more than the Greens, Die Linke, to reduce the amount of DoD that is happening in the city. They don't like development. They think development is icky and smelly and brings gentrifiers to speak English. And probably the English part is more Die Linke than the Greens, but same thing. Um, and so more people who maybe currently work at the airport and would drive as soon as they have money to drive, they would instead shift to working in Meta. And even if they can afford a car and they do buy a car for shopping, this being far, they would still ride the train to the office. A lot of it's dynamical impact of what happens as working class people get less poor. And and at some point you need to stop trying to have the equivalent of micro foundations of model shift projections, just trust the ridership models, and say, okay, the ridership model is long-term reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and this needs to happen. So instead of telling me about how much it's about how through the directly measured impact is going to take 100 something years to amortize the carbon impacts of the U-Bahn, what you need to actually say is the presence of the U-Bahn makes it easier to commute within Berlin. It means that over time, first of all, existing Berliners are likely to take jobs that use the U-Bahn. It also means that in the medium and long run, TOD will have more opportunities and will rearrange itself based on the larger network, and therefore the amortization is not going to be 100 years; it's going to be much less than that. Again, I can't tell you how much less because it's not that easy to measure. This is again a case where the costs are easier to measure than the benefits. This does not mean you should not build. When the cost, I mean, the fact that the costs are easier to measure than the benefits does not mean you have a low benefit cost ratio. It means that you need to accept more inaccuracy or more imprecision in your benefits model. That's all. This is my rant. Um, this is a rant I just wanted to say because of the issue of the uh, costs of these intermediate stations. Um, because and again, I don't know what Stefan Gelpa thinks about development in general, or about mass transit, but he did ask questions about costs. These were the costs as projected in 2014. They have run over. I believe the entire project is about 20% over projections, but you can't just prorate these because Museum itself specifically ran was delayed. So when this line opened, the through connection opened, these two stations opened, and then Museum itself opened a few months later. The construction there was much more complex. By the way, if you're wondering why this is more expensive than these two, this is a transfer station unter den Linden. So they also had to do some work on the connection to U6, which had previously used Französische Straße as its name. Uh, and then I don't know how much they actually moved the platform as opposed to just opening new exits that essentially renamed a station that was here from Französische Straße to Unter den Linden. Again, new exits here, new connections. It was not trivial, so is why it was more expensive. Museumsinsel is an underwater station. Um, the architect here can literally show you. The architect drawing literally the station was mined underwater. Now the project and it's a hundred and the trains are 105 meters long. Uh, the uh, uh, the dig is 180 meters long, so almost twice as much like in New York, but K like the keys, and this is the dig. So it's not fully like in New York it would be just like this. But and here it's like this, and this is not even dug, this is mined. Um the actual area dug is the actual volume of the dig was not onerous at all. They're not telling me the volume, they're telling me the area. The area is about 9,000 square meters, which probably would probably means a volume of, I'm guessing, about 50 or 60,000. So even if you prorate it to New York, it's probably about half the dig size. Um, and again, I can't tell you how much this costs. And this is really important because the station was built in a much more complex technique than the other two, and it's built underwater, and also has much more overage. It's 180, whereas Rotes Rathaus is 115 meters, so only about 10% overage. Um, but even though I have the cost projections, I know for a fact that they were not met, and that the overrun was disproportionately this station. So I cannot use Berlin to tell you. So I'm just using this to mostly tell you that a central but not that complex station um, with 115 meter long platforms cost this. Um, so for the benefit of New Yorkers in the audience, you need to multiply by a bit more than 1.5, let's say 1.6 to get to New York cost. Let's call it 100 million euros, 140, 150, 160 million dollars in today's money for a station in Germany. Germany is not a low cost country. This would be more because again, this ran over by a lot. I cannot tell you by how much because I haven't seen it broken down, but this has run, but there are delays were specifically this one. Um, but this is under a river. They had to freeze the ground to build this because the soil beneath the river is sandy. This is a city center transfer point. Um, anchor yourself, anchor yourself to these two costs. Again, this being unusually difficult. Um, and okay, this is the New York. Sorry, this is a Berlin question, and I'm just gonna point this out that even here where they underbuild, there's way too much austerity. They built three stations. They should have been like given Berlin's current demand, especially now because so much of the internet is moving to Berlin. Literally, like the Berlin is probably so. I don't think Berlin has the biggest tech industry in Europe at all. I think so. The biggest Google office in Europe is Zurich. I believe it goes Zurich, then Dublin, then London, then Munich. Biggest European tech firm is Spotify, which is Swedish. It's in Stock. It's based in Stockholm. I think two subway stops outside outside T-Centralen. Um, but the kind of like the hacker culture is very Berlin. Um, like a lot of people who specifically leave San Francisco and the San Francisco tech industry to Europe, they don't go to Munich, they go to Berlin. Um, Eugen lives in Berlin. Um, like Mastodon is incorporated in Berlin, and and so far it's been mostly crypto because the actually useful tech firms are mostly in they're mostly staying in San Francisco. It's the newer tech firms that are looking for cheaper places, and often these do crypto bullshit. But as we're saying, it's also useful tech firms. So Berlin is a city that I think has a very bright future ahead of it. It needs to be much less austerian about this, which means it should not be building three stations. It should be building 30 stations. Yeah, yeah, I could see the city build 30 O and S1 underground stations at once. So S21 is already under construction. They're already talking about extending U7 at both ends. So from Spandau, I think to around here, Strasse, and then towards the airport. That's a couple stops each. U8 to Magnusfield has to be built. Um, Either U6 or U5. I can even see both through the old grounds of Tegel, where they're trying to do a lot of new development called the Urban Tech Republic. So please make it TOD. And I'm sure that someone will still say that this is carbon, that it'll take forever to amortize the carbon on this because it's so much easier to measure the carbon impact of the concrete than it is to measure the carbon impact of this being transit accessible. Remembering this is not an airport anymore. This is fallow land that people are mulling how to reuse. So U6 would be a branch here. U5 would be a long extension from Hauptbahnhof, which has been planned for many years. So the bell mouths for it and the the transfer points here to U9 and here to U7 have already been built. Um, so this would be a long one. Build the U10 proposal instead of making it a streetcar. I mean, yeah, Berlin can build 30 U-Bahn stations. It should be. Scale is nice. Berlin needs to grow. However, even given that they only built three, these were their costs. Again, focus more on this and not on a mined underwater station where they had to freeze the soil. Um, so let's contrast this with something that uh, about the MTA in New York City. Now, this is an article in Streets blog that covers us. Now, our event was the 26th of October. The article appears 15th of November. Uh, and I am not going to read the entire article for you. You can read it yourself. Uh, Also, you can like literally ask me about anything here in chat right now. And I can just tell you. Now, let's uh focus on this. There are independent cost estimates and itemized prices. The information, however, stays in-house because you see, in Southern Europe, they have figured that as an anti-corruption measure, this should be public. Now, in New York, they don't think so. In New York, the head of capital construction thinks that this is a bad practice. Now, if you're wondering what his qualifications are for saying this, I'm going to read to you a list of Jamie Torres Springer's infrastructure successes and qualifications. Moving on, the problem is that they don't understand that they need to learn from a place that can build this when they're a place that builds stations that are admittedly larger for trains that are again about 60%, uh, actually 80% longer. But it's not a factor. But the difference is not 1.8x. No, the difference is something like 8x, 62. Um, this is a line that was actually that if you adjust for inflation, you're actually making New York look worse because New York built Second Avenue subway earlier than Berlin built the U5 extension. Um, so this should be not 1.4, but if you adjust something like 1.3, actually maybe 1.35, so 80 and a bit $million, and each station of Second Avenue subway was not 80 and a bit times factor for train size, which it would be 130. No, it was about 700. So yeah, 6x. Even taking size into account. If you don't, it's about 9x. Um, Now, I can't tell you how Germany does things because I haven't done as in-depth of a study of Germany. Germany is fascinating this way. And when I say fascinating, is that I can tell you how cheap countries work. You know, the Nordic countries, which are becoming less and less cheap every year. Southern Europe, really, it's really good. Turkey is kind of like Southern Europe with lower wages. Um, I presume that Latin America, the better parts of Latin America are Spain, but with lower wages that countermand lower efficiency, whatever that means. South Korea is very good, but I generally don't know. I wish I did. And then you have the disaster zones, of which the worst is, of course, New York City. The rest of the United States also has an honorable mention in the Hall of Infamy, as do Singapore, Hong Kong, London, which learned quite a lot from British consultants who worked on destroying state capacity in Singapore and Hong Kong, and then came home and reported that it worked. Um, that's also in the Hall of Infamy. Toronto, uh, honestly, like outside the Anglosphere, Munich might actually belong in that Hall of Infamy. That's the problem. Here in Germany, we have a Hall of Infamy city, which is Munich, with the second tunnel coast, and Berlin doesn't do any of that shit. And it's not. And I wish I could say that the Bavarians are dumbasses. No, the other city in Bavaria with the subway, Nuremberg, has the lowest construction cost in Germany. Um, it's like Germany is so fascinating pattern of construction costs that are generally inconsistent between cities in the same country, and I don't know why. And even within the same city, there are really weird things, like how in Berlin they have these costs, but they don't build very much. And I just expect that this kind of mid environment is one where if I ask, I will hear I will hear a melange of really good and really bad practices. Something that to some extent I've seen in France. I emphasize to some extent, which France being another mid country. Um, but at any rate, there's this kind of American, I think also British stereotype that Germany things just work. We can't be like them. We things here don't just work. Essentially, the issue is that there's an American language and a British language and also a French language of middle class and even more so upper middle class hate for poor people. And I don't say poor, I mean poorer. I mean the average right, even the average right on a TGV. The the best example of the French language of hate is that in Germany, by default, an intercity train ticket is a standing ticket. You don't get a seat reservation. If there are too many people on the train, first come first. Some people have seat reservations and they get to sit and watch the plebs play first come first served games. Um, I have not ever had to stand on a train on an intercity train in Germany, even when buying standing tickets. But there was a close call once. In fact, it was the most delayed train. And so the way this works is that let's say I find myself with a standing ticket and I'm seeing, and let's say I'm going between Köln and Berlin, and I'm seeing a label that says Hanover to Berlin on a screen above the seat, and this means the seat is occupied Hanover to Berlin, which means I can sit in Köln, but when the train reaches Hanover, I will have to stand because someone with a seat reservation has priority. In France, they don't do this. And the explanation that I've heard is that the French public is not as disciplined as the German public, and that there would be conflict between the passengers. Because of that, they say they cannot rely on seat turnover. So essentially, the system of standing tickets is a way to work with seat turnover on an intercity train. France not really grokking seat turnover. They try to run trains mostly non-stop between major cities. Trains between Paris and Marseille don't stop in Lyon. Trains from Paris to Lyon don't continue onward to Marseille. This is madness, but it's the French language of elite hate for the general public, viewing the general public as too violent and antisocial to have nice things, like trains with higher frequency. I have lived in France. I have lived in Germany. I've lived in the United States. I recently visited London. It was a fascinating safari. Among the four countries that I've just mentioned, Germany has, by a pretty big margin, the worst culture about queuing. People just shove. Um, I get people cut me in line at the supermarket unless I physically protect my space, which is difficult. I'm not very physically imposing. Um, I keep joking that the best way to say that, contrary to racist belief, Muslim immigrants actually are assimilating is that in Germany, hijabis do cut me off in line at the supermarket, and in France, they never did, and I didn't see it in London either. And to be very clear, in London, I was going to supermarkets not just in Canary Wharf, but also in non-Canary Wharf parts of East London. There were hijabis, um, and so the language of elite hate is this idea that, oh, our working class is the worst or is unusually bad. So they cannot have nice things that Germans have. You can see this also with the conversation about proof of payment, where people in France and in the United States, and I think also in the United Kingdom, believe that you cannot do proof of payment on the subway because people are too violent. Um, I literally said something about police brutality on Twitter a couple hours ago, and an American told me, "Oh yeah, I say this from living in a very safe city." Berlin has I think the highest crime rate in Germany, but also Berlin. I don't think Berlin has a lower crime rate than New York City. Um, Lower murder rate, sure. Fewer people here have guns, and the cops here actually do their job about solving murders, but violent crime in general, Germany is unusually safe. Berlin, especially not. But this kind of language of hate for commoners by either actual elites or people who think themselves are elites but are percentile 70 and are just commoners with um, air conditioning. Um, this language of hate is such that um, they look at various aspects of behavior of people that are poorer than them, and they pathologize it. So in New York, in general in the United States, especially in New York, it is visibly black behavior. For example, um, when black people speak to each other without code switching, um, that is something that white people pathologize. And where is it most common for people to interact in public, but not for the performance of the public, on the street and on public transport? Um, when I talk here, this is performance for our public of viewers, which means that I will use the kind of language of, let's say, posting with an A, like this kind of posting, but a well understood language of posting from online social media. I'm not going to use extremely personal references. Okay, there's like an entire language of put downs that I developed with my sibling 20 years ago, um, that we still use with each other. If my sibling and I sit on the subway, we're going to use that because we talk to each other. And yeah, there are other people. It doesn't matter. We're not talking to them. We're talking to each other. Am I going to use this language on stream here? No. This is like, it's something that comes from like when my sibling and I went to see a movie in 2002 or 2003. Um, and so this is something that's idiolectic, but this is something that's also true dialectically. That if I talk not on stream, but in a more, but let's say in my reports, or if I webinar, or the in-person event that we did last month, I didn't use extremely online language. I didn't say things like because, like I didn't use the expression because internet. I don't know if you're going to know the it's also Gretchen McCall book because of thing where because um is not a preposition, because it's a conjunction, because of is a preposition, but on the internet, in like it's specifically in nerd language, it's normal to say because, to use because as a preposition. So you say something. So if you want to say something that something is true, sorry, not something true, that something is happening, and the explanation is about racism, you say because racism. Or if the explanation is literally anything, it's because That not because of it's not a language that I would use again. It's a language that I would use on stream. It's not a language that I would use in a webinar, let alone in a written report. So this is a little bit of code switching, but this is much more pervasive and also much more accented when when it's black people. And so on the subway and on the street, white New Yorkers and non-black people of color, maybe upwardly mobile black people who drill their families about the need to use like on the need to code switch in a mixed company, and then they see other black people um, speak African American vernacular on the subway. Yeah, they speak to other black people, but white people can hear it, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable for reasons that are it's literally because racism. Um, so they don't notice this in Europe. Why not? First of all, if it's not in Britain or Ireland, it would not be in English. But even if it is in Britain, are accents classed? Absolutely. Do you think an American can tell the difference? Like, I mean, do you think an American who thinks that the accent of the chimney sweep in Mary Poppins is actually accurate Cockney can go to East London, could go to East London, sorry, in the 1950s, let alone going to East London today, and accurately judge someone's class by their accent? Of course not. So Americans just don't notice the same language of, in this case, British denigration of British commoners, or maybe white denigration of people of color, or middle class denigration of the working class. Let alone they would not notice in France, and of course not in Germany. So they would say, "Oh, Germany doesn't have social problems." Of course it does. Of course Germany has social problems. A lot of the social problems are actually pretty parallel. For example, in both Germany and the United States, a really important animating force behind the new right has been school segregation, by race in the United States, by class here. But but actually, there are a lot of similarities, are just very easy not to notice. So yeah, a person can say, "Well, let's not learn from Germany. Germany doesn't have our corruption." Well, no shit, Germany doesn't have people like you in charge. And the worst thing about this is it's not just Germany. We did not, as I said, we didn't study Germany very closely in our report. I did not know what I was going to study, and but so at the time we were doing hiring, we were doing the hiring for other people to do some reports. We had Elif and Marco, so we had Turkey and Italy, and then we were looking for another low to mid cost case, and I was debating between France, Germany, and Sweden, and picked Sweden. And I'm not 100% sure that I made the right decision, but at the time it didn't seem terrible. I still don't think it was a terrible decision. Um, for me to spend months reading everything that has been written in English and try to hack through things that have been written in Swedish about this. But the point is that people in the United States understand that Italy has social problems such as corruption. They also understand that Germany has them much less. I think most Americans will understand. Will, if you ask them which country, I'm pretty sure that you go to people in Germany, U.S., Italy, you ask them these three countries. Can you rank them to me in order of how corrupt you think they are? They will. I think I think in all three countries, people will agree pretty consistently that Germany is the best, Italy is the worst, and that is actually correct. It's actually correct on like private sector perceptions of corruption. Um, so the issue here is that maybe they're not learning from Germany because Germany doesn't like it sound like a higher class of person somehow, which is just bullshit. And Italy, oh, we can't learn from Italy; it's corrupt. But here's the thing: the reason Italy doesn't doesn't have people like Jamie Torres Springer in charge, the reason Italy has good people in charge, the reason Italy doesn't think this, the reason Italy thinks the exact opposite, is because of its history of corruption. Europeans enjoy mocking American racism. American racism is very mockable, but often mocking American racism for Europeans and also for Canadians is a way of distracting from racism here. And that sometimes gets to the point that people will not even believe that an American solution to racism could work here because, oh, Americans are racist. Why would we learn from them? And meanwhile, for the last 60 years, there have been all these several rights solutions in the United States that have made the United States, on average, I don't think more racist than Western Europe. Some things better, some things worse. Depends on where in Western Europe. But um, but the issue is that, and it's the same thing with. But the issue is it's the same thing with Italian corruption. Yes, everyone knows Italy is corrupt. Italy knows Italy is corrupt. The Italians know this. You're not telling the Italians anything new when you're saying, "Oh, corruption." The Italians know, and something that Marco said during the talk, um, that something we said on follow up, something that we mentioned in the Italy report, which I guarantee you that Jamie has not read, but we reference it in the synthesis in the overall report explaining everything together, which Jamie has read or has had the ability to read and expressed interest in. Italy specifically took this philosophy and set it on fire and replaced it with a philosophy of transparency with itemized prices being out there. And the reason it did that is as an anti corruption measure. It's like how in the United States, the United States is a racist state? Absolutely. Do Americans know that it is a racist state? Yes. Do you think that I mean, I think it's Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who is trying to delay when school children are going to learn about Martin Luther King. Do you think he doesn't know who MLK was and what he fought? Of course he knows. He's just trying to. I mean, it's mostly people just not wanting to feel guilty about something that they know is true. And the upshot is that because of that, the United States has had. I'm not saying everything the United States had on fighting racism has been correct. These can be um, evaluated externally, but some of the measures turn out to actually have been successful. Um, and now with Italy, we can externally evaluate these anti-corruption measures, especially when it comes to infrastructure construction costs. After all, the Tangentopoli was specifically about subway construction costs. It specifically came because of the explosion in subway construction costs in Italy in the 1980s. Um, Money Puliti was specifically a way to prevent the political corruption that led to that from ever happening again. We can evaluate that and see, is Italy a cheap or an expensive place to build in? And the answer is cheap. Cheaper than it was in the 1980s. So this is an example of staring at success and saying, we don't do it this way. Anyway, I have mentioned Jamie Torres Springer's uh, achievements and qualifications to have any kind of opinion on this before. Um, Gonna take questions about this right now. And oh, and if you want this, in budget, on budget all the time, and he specifically asks to be measured by relative costs, not by absolute costs. Again, it's one of those changes for the worst type things. I like Fluvier. People should read Fluvier. People are reading too much Fluvier, and instead they should be reading more about absolute costs. Again, I'll take questions about this right now, and I don't know if I'm going to move on to cross-border rail or if I've been streaming for too long already. Yeah, it's 2 hours. Oh, hi, thanks, Bernanke. Um, so yeah, if people have questions about this construction costs point or about anything else, I'm going to take these questions. Otherwise, I don't know if I can try to finish 9:30. So 2 hour video, 2 hour 10 stream. But that's where I am. Um, Meanwhile, let me drink. Also, while we're here, I'm going to do something that will lead some people to cancel me. I am very open about my flows. Will I be uploading this to YouTube? This is on YouTube, yes. I mean, not for you at 9:19 on day of but it will be uploaded to YouTube. Anyway, if you're wondering what I'm going to do that's going to get me canceled, it's not the white. No, it's not uploading this on YouTube. No, it's. Can you tell what this is? Can you tell what I'm putting in my mouth right now? It's yummy. It is the worst thing. Um. So, oh, I guess you've just been. I guess you've just seen this, so you don't know what I was talking about before. Um. So, I spent about, you know, and literally until this. So here's time. I spent about 40 minutes talking about invisible disabilities and about issues of chronic pain, and how corona specifically is disproportionate danger to people who suffer from chronic illness or chronic pain, and as a result, the move on YOLO mentality to corona has reduced their ability to participate in public life. And then since then it was going on construction costs. Mostly was talking about how Berlin is engaging in too much austerity and how Berlin Greens have this problem of uh, knowing the cost of every project in carbon. For example, they can just check how much concrete was used, but they cannot measure the benefits because the benefits in ridership are very easy to estimate, but the benefits in long-term reduction in car use um, are very obvious at macro scale. If you compare Berlin, um, you compare Berlin with American cities that didn't do what Berlin did. Um, you even compare um, Berlin with cities that didn't invest as much in commuter rail, like Milan, which has had delayed investments and accordingly has a much lower commuter rail ridership than comparable German or Spanish cities. It's recovering, it's increasing, but it's not. They're opposing subway projects because of embedded carbon. And if I look a little bit, I can, yeah, this. This is the example. They specifically think that the carbon amortization is going to take more than 100 years, which is complete bullshit because essentially it's really easy to measure cost, the carbon costs upfront, but it's really hard to measure the um, positive impact on the environment because these people obviously know what mode shift is and they're trying to induce it, but it's really hard to measure mode shift from building subways. It obviously exists, but it requires so many differences, so many long term changes in commuting patterns and travel patterns. It's really hard to attribute to a specific instance. Yeah, I don't think they're trying to. I think it's just really difficult to measure, and there like there is sometimes a neoliberal um, impulse in the green movement, and I'm contrasting neoliberalism specifically not with like socialism, but with developmentalism. So I'm contrasting something that is often within the same party. Let's call this party the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, moving toward more privatization and more marketization, or the Social Democratic Party in Sweden, same thing, very developmental, probably the best example of developmentalism by a progressive party. Um, and but then transitioning toward and then transitioning the state toward pure client. So it doesn't do things; it just supervises private consultants and contractors. And there are things for which it works really well, and there are things for which it works really awfully. Um, for example, with infrastructure, it works really awfully. You need to have some kind of top-down control of infrastructure planning. But specifically, one of the issues is that like the attempt to measure everything in like one benefit cost ratio gets really hard on things that are where the benefits are generally harder to measure than the costs. So again, I don't think they're trying to make this look worse. It's just if you're not very sensitive to what is easier to measure and what is harder to measure, you're just going to be led astray. Um, like to the extent that we have a progressive party in Berlin that is openly bad faith, it is not the Greens, it is SPD with its terrible mayor. In fact, two terrible mayors in a row. And if you're no, I'm not gonna look. And the last thing is this is specifically how the MTA is just not really in the mood to learn from Europe. Um, so anyway, yeah, that's a summary of what I've been talking about. You can ask questions. I'm fine with people reopening old points. Like I'm specifically not trying to be very tight with these videos. If I were, the videos would not be an hour to 2 hours. They would be 5 minutes maximum. From the good parts of Europe, yes. On the other hand, every single European city with a subway has built the subway for lower quality. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Eastern Europe specifically got the like Eastern Europe went capitalist in a neoliberal and not developmentalist model because it was the 1990s. It's the same thing with Copenhagen. Copenhagen has Copenhagen traditionally had the highest construction costs of subway tunnels in the Nordic countries because Copenhagen did it in the 1990s, whereas the other three capitals started much earlier, 40s and 40s in Stockholm, I'm forgetting one in Oslo and in Helsinki, I think like 70s or 80s. But by the time Copenhagen was doing it, it was in such privatized estate model, it was already doing things like design build and tax increment financing. So again, trying to specifically tie costs to benefits somehow. And then yeah, and so now since the rest of Scandinavia has essentially become like Denmark, yeah, and I will say that Poland is another really fascinating country alongside Germany because the costs are not very consistent there, same way as here. Yeah, M2 is just unusually expensive, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm looking at the regional rail tunneling costs in Łódź, and they're not high. Um, and yeah, by the way, about small lots, I don't actually think that small lots are necessarily a good thing. Maybe they are in the context of Poland because I expect Poland to still have a lot of small builders, but the construction industry is consolidating. Large contracts are a reaction to that because if you have many small companies, let's call you Chile, then yeah, you want small or you want small individual contracts in order to make it easy for the small builders to compete. Um, Bear in mind, Turkey has a giant domestic construction industry, which is not at all consolidated to many firms, but they still do big contracts. But mostly big contracts is a way of attracting internationals because if you're a small country like Sweden, then you're not going to have enough of a domestic industry anymore. Or I mean, you will have a domestic industry, but it's going to be very few firms. In Italy, it used to be four firms, and they've merged down to three. The state being a little bit developmental still, it's going to take a stake, and I think the largest of them. But the but the point is to have an environment that firms from the rest of Europe, at the very least, could be interested in going into. So this requires larger contracts to get someone who literally speaks no Polish. I don't even know. I literally don't know any Polish. I mean, I don't even know the expression like na silny chuj. I don't know how to say that in Polish. And so the and so the upshot is that the large lots is they tend to look bad because the issue is that there are a lot of different things that co-occur. So large lots, design build, pure client, privatization of risk, fixed price. All of these tend to co-occur because they're part of like the same kind of idea to like somehow privatize procurement, if that makes sense. But and because overall this package is bad, every single aspect of it will correlate with badness. But it's a little bit like how every single aspect of the English-speaking world correlates with high construction costs. But some of these have nothing to do with it. Like the use of the English language is not literally something that's going to make your construction costs high. Pick a dumb example. Or in rich countries, driving on the left it correlates with higher construction costs because yeah, you're racing on the United States, but you are capturing high costs in Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, and also to some extent Japan. Um, is it causal? Obviously not. And the same is also true of things that like are not as self-evidently unrelated. Um, so I don't think large lots by themselves are bad. At this point, I don't even think design build is by itself terrible. I think design build is okay if you keep the same in-house team that could supervise design build and you have them supervise design build instead. I think it should be okay. The problem is that when you also use this to let your in-house team go and then they all join consultant. That's the problem. Lump sum is terrible. Don't ever do it. You should itemize, um, and you should never privatize risk. Like these are the two important things. So yeah, so I think that's a situation in war. So just a bunch of it is it's just weird more than anything. Bear in mind the weirdness in the weirdness in Warsaw. I mean, let us look through the good book of how much it costs to build it in Poland. And it does occur to me that if I put country PL, then so let me see if this is going to work. Let's see if this is going to work with my slow ass going on. Okay, no, it's only with my slow ass about to fall apart computer that should be in school right now. Okay, not showing PL. Okay, Warsaw. Yeah, so line two. Yeah, that's terrible. But all the outward extension of it, the ones that don't go under the river, are not bad at all. What else? Will you find wood if I don't type in the accent? Yes. This is a regional rail tunnel. Um, so it's kind of weird that the original line two tunnel under the river was really bad, and no, that's not usually that big of a premium. Factor of three, certainly with their landings there, no. But but the extensions have not been so terrible. Yeah, this is Łódź. Is there any other Poland in the database? I don't think there is. If you know Polish subway costs, let me know. I mean, or Polish subway projects, let me know. Oh, it's the water table. Oh, okay. If it's yeah, if they rushed construction for some reason, yeah, that 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 will do it. Like you should never rush. I mean, you should evaluate contractors based on how fast they work, but you should never rush the design and the planning. Measure twice. Actually, fuck that shit. You're all a bit bigger. Measure 8 times, cut once. Still better than measure once, cut 8 times because you've had to change contractor several times, sue your contractor several times, and rewrite the contract once. Yeah, no. If you use fines like this, then essentially everyone's going to just bid higher. That's a problem. It's a New York style problem of it's the same thing that so like I want to say that Jeremy Torres Springer is following the Polish model. Um, what is the link that he said? Yes, and then yes. So when you think like this, yeah, you're gonna have where was it? Yeah, this is what happens when you work like New York. I mean, work like New York. New York would die to have this cost with the high water table underwater, right? I mean, like Second Avenue subway was much easier than this. No, New York. So New York does this wrong and many other things wrong. Um, but yeah. Um, And even again, and even with this cost, I will take the opinions of most not probably nearly all subway managers in urban Poland, which I guess just means Warszawa, over those of New York. Um, yeah, so am I answering your question about like the connection with Warszawa? It's actually a really interesting thing. I don't actually know what's going on with Polish costs very much. It's really helpful. I know all I know is that Eastern European costs tend not to be too different from Western European ones. I'm guessing I'm literally having Bucharest and Sofia next to me. Bulgaria is somehow really cheap. I don't know why. Um, it's not because of low wages, because Romania has approximately the same wages. And also usually when you're low wage, you also have shit efficiency. Like Bulgaria, like the Bulgarian government is like Israeli levels of stability. Oh, that's not bad at all. Do I have M3 here? I don't think I have M3. I will look for M3 when, I mean, I will look for M3 depending on how advanced the construction is, but yeah, that's really not bad. Yeah, it's really, yeah, that's the issue. Like, where we're specifically, the reason we're doing all these case studies is that, it's like, it can't give you trends, out of, um, 600 or however many projects this is. Thank you for everyone who added things that don't have costs on this. I love your commitment to cleaning the data, and by your, it's probably my job to do it. So yeah, 900 projects, but only about 60 countries. Um, so at some point, like you need to go qualitative to understand things. This is why I keep fishing. What the fuck, Krakow? Why did Krakow think that it would cost to build that would cost 500 per kilometer for the first line? Usually the first line is the cheapest. Usually the first line is where the so they're putting their tramway underground. Oh, they're doing a Stadtbahn. That's actually not bad for Krakow. Like I don't think like honestly, the city size of Krakow should seriously be looking at things short of full metro. So things like so things like Stadtbahn tunnel, things like a things like very small driverless metro is also really good. Like in Torino, or in Brescia, the um, trains are small, and so the stations are small, and this reduces station construction costs. Krakow, Krakow. I don't actually know how much of this is Krakow and how much of it is. I'm just going to randomly draw things that look like diameters from like high altitude Google Earth tourism. That's like what city center, I guess, is here, city square. So okay, the factory is 10 out, but it's on the train. Like most of these things, like it's like six, seven, sometimes five at the very end. Like okay, this is eight, but like most of this is, yeah. I mean, this is not something that you necessarily need 12 metro for. I mean, I imagine you want to get rid of to get out of city center congestion, but that's something we actually should be looking at. Yeah, okay, that is sketch. I mean, it's pretty standard for pre-metros because of weird alignment compromises. The subway surface lines in America, so that would be Green Line in Boston, subway surface lines in Philadelphia, and Muni Metro in San Francisco. All of them have the exact same problem. Uh, I do not know to what extent Germany has this problem. Um, would be useful to look. I think Oslo actually has a pre-metro maybe. Um, but yeah, it's something. I mean, you can get really good public transport ridership out of this. So I think the best would be Hannover actually. It's something that I've been through but never in. Where yeah, you actually have I think it's a three. I think so. The Hannover system is three lines that they don't meet in a triangle, but I think they all meet at a point maybe. Um, and it looks really awkward because there are some branches that are shared with things that stay on the surface, reverse branches of it. They actually maybe the cleanest. I don't know if the highest ridership, but high ridership for sure is Dortmund, just because it's a triangle. Um, yeah, no, it's something that exists, and it's something that just because it's so commonly used in the Rhine-Ruhr, literally all of the Rhine-Ruhr systems are that, unless you can flip out the house. So it's Köln, Bonn, Düsseldorf, Duisburg, Essen, Bochum, Dortmund, and I'm forgetting if I already said Duisburg. Or I said Dort. Then uh, these are all free metros. I mean, again, they're called Stadtbahn here, not free metro, but yeah. Again, it's not bad. If I'm already on Dortmund, let's go in the middle of the three intersection points and try to measure distance to the end of the built-up area using our trusty method of Google Earth tourism. I mean, this is a smaller city than Krakow, but not really. Only by a little bit. Um, I can't even tell you metro areas because what they'll count as the metro area until. Um, but yeah, no, it's actually something that is not a terrible decision for Krakow to do this, especially because Krakow has a very well developed tramway system. If you if you have a really well developed tramway system that you're trying to um, it's not the 17th century. Ukraine is not under Polish control. Close friends, but independent states. Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah. So, if you're, I'm actually kind of curious what the wages are because I imagine that Poland is paying absolute garbo wages. Now Poland also does not have the ability to afford very high wages, but my guess is that you can actually pay higher wages. Um, oh, that sucks. Yeah, being able to go driverless is really useful. So even in Italy, I've never heard it justified in terms of not paying the driver's wage. Bear in mind, Italy is not a very rich country, but it is at this point wealthier than Poland, at least until the next Italian austerity package. Um, and so in a place like, but what I heard is that driverless metros in Italy, they're a tool to permit extremely high frequency. So the normal systems can do every 75 seconds, also in Paris. Brescia is every 67 in theory. I emphasize in theory. I guess smaller trains can follow slightly closer together or something. Um, Especially at low speed it matters because the headway is measured between front of train and front of train. The minimum stopping distance is back of train to front of train. So it should matter, although probably it shouldn't matter when the difference is between 100 meters of train and actually maybe it does. I mean, the difference between 100 meters of train and 40 meters of train length is like 60 meters. It's not quite 7 seconds, but close. And in Italy, maybe the thing of the big train is not 100, but 140. So 140 versus 40, 100 meters. I don't know, 10 seconds. I can see that. Um, yeah, so that's the main issue for driverless metros. Like, the problem is that like you kind of can't convert one to the other very easily because a driverless metro can not actually be connected to a tramway, whereas a um, system that's so deeply embedded as a pre-metro with many branches is the important part can't easily be converted. I mean, you can convert if you are willing to cut off branches. Stockholm did that, but something with like Krakow has a big enough tramway system that I think it should be using the tramway system. So I actually think that the pre-metro decision is not going to defend other decisions, but the pre-metro decision is not terrible. Um, yeah, sucks about Poznan. Sucks about um um I don't even know where else. I mean, I guess in Łódź they're building. I guess in Łódź they're building the regional rail, the cross city line, and in Katowice they just need to have. I don't even know what they need in Katowice. Like people just drive everywhere because it's polycentric. which is something I wish that German Greens understood, that polycentricity as in Silesia, but as in Upper Silesia, but also as in the Ruhr generally makes me more auto-oriented than the monocentricity of Warsaw, Berlin, and München, Hamburg, Stockholm. Um, anyway, are there other questions before we geek out about Polish? Yeah, yeah, the regional rail around Katowice is not bad. It's just that um, at the end of the day, um, not a lot of people work near the train stations because the train station. So the issue is that the train station in in the big city is a good location because otherwise there's congestion. So if you want to open an office in Berlin, you will do it in city center, which in the case of Berlin means not quite the entire inside of the ring, but most of the inside of the ring is available to you. But you're not going to open an office, I don't know, in Weissens there or something, or in Pankow. And I mean, technically Pennsylvania is part of Pankow, I mean like actual Pankow. Because it's really congested. It's still the city, it's congested to get there by car. Quite a lot of the workers don't even have cars. And by transit, it's kind of a chore to get there. So you only build there if there's like a concerted DoD effort, like making it an intersection between two lines, things like that, or building more lines there in general. Um, but if the city is very small and doesn't have the same congestion problem, then the city center loses value, and this is a big problem in the United States as well, where it's the secondary downtowns that have been the most hollowed. In the Northeast, New York looks nice. Philadelphia, I mean, it's not rich, but it looks nice. And then it's places like Trenton or New Haven or Providence that have been completely gutted. Um, just because city center, because on the one hand, the out maybe not city center, but the outlying locations in the city don't have enough traffic or parking problems that people would just not drive. And then in city center, suddenly that's the weird one because then maybe it gets harder to drive there a little bit, but also there's not enough there that you can have a very strong mass transit network. And that's how you get into a situation where the tallest building in Providence, the Superman building, is empty and is essentially a total write-off. And the only reason they haven't demolished it is because it's symbolically important to the city, and they keep looking for someone. And it's still a downtown location. It's not worth $0, but it's worth very little, far less than replacement cost. And I suspect this is what happens when you're too polycentric. That yeah, in Katowice, it's fine, but then why would I open an office in Bytom or Gliwice or Sosnowiec? Why would I open it regional rail accessible if most people own cars? And an outlying location is better for the drivers. Um, and so this is what I'm suspecting is the problem with polycentricity. And again, it's something that I can't prove to you is the reason why Silesia is the most auto-oriented major metro area in Poland, but the fact that it is, um, and the fact that the Rhine-Ruhr is the most auto-oriented of the largest metropolitan regions in Germany. Um, and again, it's never the city centers. Like Dortmund has a pretty strong Stadtbahn system, and same as Essen, Düsseldorf, Köln, but then all the stuff around them, the Unas, the Gelsenkirchens, the Hagens, the Solingen, um, like together, they're just not as much of a um, there's not much of a transoriented core. Things are just suburbs of Berlin or suburbs of Munich or suburbs of Warsaw or suburbs of Stockholm. And again, it's something that I wish the Greens specifically got because the Greens think that polycentricity is good for sustainability, and it's the exact opposite. This is something I might blog about. Um, okay, I said 2 hours and it's been 20 on recording. So, are there questions before I? What's the best polycent? I don't know. Okay, let me be an annoying member of my religion and answer with the question, what do you define as polycentric? For example, I would not think of Tianjin as polycentric just because I think of Osaka as a giant thing. Yeah, it's adjacent to Kyoto, which is its own giant thing. But I usually think of polycentricity as like my prototypes for polycentricity are Silesia, the Ruhr, and what else? To some extent Milan, actually. To some extent Randstad. And I don't think of any of them as especially transit oriented. Um, they all have very weak public transport ridership relative to their sizes. Especially when you think of Milan as just Milan, an immediate suburb, but like the broadest region or something. And again, same is true of Randstad. It's always the case that the much smaller core metropolitan areas, like Amsterdam itself, is not very auto oriented. Rotterdam isn't. Dortmund, Essen, Düsseldorf, Köln, they aren't. Milan isn't. But then the broader region is in a way that a monocentric region like Ile-de-France or Berlin or London is not. Yeah, okay, yeah. Milan does not have a Kobe or a Kyoto. Yeah, you're right, but um, Milan is still pretty polycentric as I understand it. Um, I can't tell. I don't know what's in the larger urban zone offhand, so I can't tell you how much of these things are actually second centers. Obviously, none of them is as big as Kyoto or Kobe, but also this is not as big as Osaka either. Um, but my understanding is a lot of these are actually historic cities, like certainly Pavia, for example. Pavia is a is like a separate historic city. You go farther out, you get into things like Novara, you get into things like Bergamo, the airport. I mean, it's literally an airport. That is that I think I don't think it's the main one. I think it's one of the localist ones. Como, things like that. Like there actually are historic centers here. Now that does not make it polycentric, but my understanding is that like all of these are also kind of subsidiary centers and they're pretty auto oriented. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know Keihanshin well at all. Um, I can believe that Keihanshin manages to be both transit oriented and polycentric, except that it's not actually polycentric; it's tricentric, of which each of these of which is smaller of the two centers are larger than Praga or Warsaw, and then the big one, and then the big one, just by itself, is probably the size of Paris. So, um, I mean, some problems can just be solved through sheer size, e.g., New York's continued wealth despite having genuinely terrible political leadership for decades. Um, so anyway, that's my take on politics diversity also. Are there other questions? For the record, what I'm doing right now is I am trying to look at the Matryoshka doll in order to understand what the lag is, and I want to say it's 8 seconds, but I'm pretty sure it's more than that. I can just measure the lag by looking at the difference here. Six. Yeah, and there was a bit of a lag spike. Yeah, yeah, it's about 10 second lag. Yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna give people another opportunity to ask questions. Ask questions or questions. And yeah, if not, then we can adjourn. Um, so yeah, this was intense. So bear in mind, this wasn't to be a short stream. I kept thinking, oh, I'm doing 2 streams a week right now, and I want to stream a week because I stream for an hour and not for 4 hours. Like I have too much to say and I say too slowly. But I guess this was a long stream because of all the topics. And bear in mind, we didn't even get to cross border rail. So, So, oh, what do I think is an acceptable speed for a motor? Oh, you mean acceptable average speed? The answer is that it depends on the city that it's in. So, in a very dense, so anchor yourself with the following number. In Paris, the average speed of T3 is about 18. Um, Now, Paris is also an extremely dense city, and T3 is an orbital in the outer city, but it's still intramuros. Um, I want to say in Berlin, the average speed of the trams is probably about the same, but they don't always have dedicated lanes, which is terrible. So it again depends on city size, depends on city density. In the densest environment, you want high teens, like T3 in Paris. In less dense ones, like Poland does not have very dense cities. If I do not know what the average speed here is, but you should aim low to mid. I'm guessing low to mid 20s for a tramway, unless it's like something that's very city centery and very Warsaw. But like in Krakow, in Krakow or something that is mostly in the suburbs of Warsaw, you might even want to think about high 20s as a good target. Um, and then metro, I'm guessing you want an average speed low 30s. London is, I want to say 32, 33. Um, Paris is less than that, but Paris has unusually tight stop spacing, and They are widening it for the newer trains. And also, if it's a full metro, not a shotgun, then it's driverless, which gives you extra speed because the computers are going to be more precise. And I was talking about accessibility before you got here. It also means that the driving is going to be smoother. Uh, and the and so if you do that, then the it's just extra, even if it's like small train in a small city where you just are going to have tighter stop spacing because the city is smaller. Uh, so yeah, aim for low 30s. So rapid transit under no circumstance should be sub 30. Should be averaging sub 30. Again, if you're legacy because you're Paris or New York, we can say that, but still try to up it. Tram, again, I can't give you an exact number because it depends on traffic and it depends on city size, but 18 is Paris. So go up from there. More important, instead of looking at target, look at interventions. So, for example, you want the road to be entirely dedicated lanes. I have no idea if this is. I'm literally checking Krakow. I'm literally doing Google Earth tourism in a city that I've never been to so much as lived in, and this means that literally I do not know what the important streets are. So when I'm going over here and staring at what appears to be a mixed traffic street, I have no idea how important the street is to the city or to the network. But please, dedicated lanes. And also, if you're doing a Stadtbahn, use this as an excuse to actually have the tram center city enter the historic center. I tempted to crayon, not right now, but I'm tempted to crayon. The issue with crowning Eastern Europe is that Eastern Europe has a surplus of competent transit managers and a shortage of money with which they can realize their plans for the redevelopment and convergence of the region. Um, Sadly, the money will not come from the person who should be paying for this, aka Vladimir Putin, through reparations. Are there any questions, by the way, before I stop? Oh, Poznan is 70% dedicated. That's fine. I mean, aim for 100, but I understand that nowhere is actually 100% unless it's an American light rail system that's just one sad line that has been built after a generation of nothing. Yeah, again, I don't know the stats for Berlin either. Berlin is definitely not 100%, but they are growing it over time. But anyway, it's been 2.5 hours, and I do have other things to do, and as I said, thought it would be an hour. But thank you all for sticking with me. It's a Saturday night. It's exactly what we should be doing as rail nerds, uh, geeking out about trains on the internet. Um, so thank you both, Mars and there's Ranky, for the questions. Thanks to everyone else for watching. And I will see you if it's Twitch on Tuesday, if it's new to whatever that gets uploaded, with another topic. Might actually just be construction costs in New York on Tuesday. So thank you and ciao ciao.